What's up, everyone? My name is Pastor Andy, and I'm here at Viral Conference 2018. The theme for this year is Rabbits and Rhinos. It's about rethinking church planting in Africa and the rest of the world in this century. Now, we've had some phenomenal plenary speakers coming through from all over the place, and you're about to listen and hear from one of them. So sit back and enjoy this as God shapes and changes and shifts our mindsets regarding extending His kingdom here on earth. It's Viral 2018. God bless.
Good morning, everyone, and praise the Lord. Pastor Moses, thank you for your session this morning. At breakfast with Pastor Nick Correa, we just chatted a little and said, we need to find out what these missional communities that your church has and how they work, and what's the difference between a missional community and a small group, a home fellowship group. And so you came up and you spoke about that. And now I have a better understanding, and I've heard about 3DM but never read the book. But we'll be coming to knock at your door and to ask questions because we do want to learn. And I'm a firm believer that if you have solved the problem, I don't need to go and reinvent the wheel. I can copy you. And if it doesn't work, I'll blame you. And if it works, I'll take the credit. So, we have about 200 small groups in this church, each of about 10 to 15 people. And last year, we asked them to group up in threes. And so, 3 groups together. That's about 30 people to about 45 people together. And we asked each set of 3, there are about 200, we asked each set of 3 to go and plant a church. Wow. And so they're the ones who are going to plant the 47 churches that we're trying to plant over this next 1 year. And we've been training them and commissioning them and raising up leaders, and they're going to do the evangelism, the outreach, and etc. And so I want to learn about missional communities because maybe there are things we're doing and we could just copy from you and do a better job at it. So thank you for your session this morning. In the year 2000, we made a decision as a church to plant 300 churches by the year 2020. Now, we didn't know how we were going to do this. We had been planting churches, one church every year, one church every year. So we had about 7 churches that were planted by then. But we made the decision, and the way we made the decision was this way, okay? This is very African, I'll give an illustration that I shared with some of you just so that all of us can be on the same page. The difference between those who come from the, Western Hemisphere and we who come from the Southern Hemisphere, Africans and Indians and etc., is the people from the Western Hemisphere are very good at strategic planning, thinking through feasibility plans, and all those sorts of things, okay? We're not good at that. I had an opportunity many years ago to go to the US, and the pastor I was staying with kept guns. And he used to go out and, hunt prairie dogs. These are like moles, and they're considered to be a pest. And so during the summer when they're breeding and such, he would go out into the prairies and he would hunt them down. And so he invited me to go along, and I told him, I've never held a gun. I don't know how a gun works. We're not allowed guns in Kenya. And so he said, well, let's go to the shooting range and I'll teach you how to use a gun. So I went. I wanted to know how to use a gun. So he gave me a rifle and he told me, put the stock of the rifle to your shoulder, because when you pull the trigger and it fires, it kicks back. And so, you need to make it firm and steady your body so that when it kicks back, you don't end up shooting up, and etc. So I did. And then he told me, look down the barrel, okay, through the sights and line up the sights and the barrel with the target you're trying to hit, which was, in this case, just a tin can a distance away on a rock. And so I did that, and I looked down, and then he told me, squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it, squeeze so that it can fire. And I did. And I didn't hit the target, but I tried, okay? Now, I thought about this later on and I thought, this is a great illustration of the difference between people from the Western Hemisphere and people from the Southern Hemisphere, because even the way the churches work, the way their businesses work, the way that they, plan things is they get ready, okay, and they're ready to fire, and they look down the barrel and they say, ready, aim, and then they fire, okay? But what's happened today in the churches is this. They get ready, aim, 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 aim. We need a feasibility study. We need to look at the budgets. We need to get plans. We need, strategic plans. We need a critical path. But they never fire. And they have all these studies, one after the other, and, books are written about this, but nobody's actually doing it, even though they're writing the books, okay? We Africans and those from the Southern Hemisphere are different. We go, ready, fire! And then we say, did we hit anything? Did we hit anything? We have no strategic plans. We have no, feasibility studies. We just jump in, okay? So here we are in the year 2000, and we made a decision we're going to plant 300 churches by the year 2020. Why 300? Well, we figured we've been planting a church a year. So if we keep doing a church a year, by 2020, we'd already planted 7 churches. By 2020, we'll be 27 churches. But because we're already doing a church a year, we don't need to really think much or change anything. We just keep doing what we're doing. And so we can do 27. Then we thought, well, 27 is low because one of the things that will happen as we plant more and more churches is we'll begin to learn there's a way to do this. And once you learn the dynamics of it, you just repeat them and you can speed up. So maybe we can plant 60 by the year 2020 because after some time we don't need a whole year. We now know how to do this. We need just 9 months and then 6 months and then even maybe 3 months. So he said 60 we can do. So he said we don't need faith for 27 churches. We can do that because we're already doing it, okay? We don't really need faith for 60 churches because we just need to learn to do what we're doing a little better. So he said, why don't we believe the Lord by faith to plant 300 because we know we'll never be able to do 300 in our own strength. So he said, okay, let's 300. We don't have a plan. We don't know what we're doing. We're just shooting a number out there and saying, we're going to plant 300. And that's when we made the decision for 300 churches by the year 2020. And we picked 2020 because when your eyesight is good, you're said to have 2020 vision. So it looked like a good thing. 2020, 2020 vision, perfect eyesight, vision, and 300 churches. No plan, no strategy, no finances, but it was a vision. For the first 10 years, we didn't know what to do. I think we planted maybe another 5 or 6 churches, but we didn't know how do you plant 300 churches by the year 2020. And we're not speeding up, and guys, time is going. It was around 2010 that we woke up and we said, hey, guys, we need to do something. 2020 is now, 10 years have gone. We've only got half the time, and now we have 10 years to plant 300 churches instead of the 20 years we had before. Well, we decided, okay, guys, one of the things we need to do is really pray that God shows us what to do, because I don't know how to plant 300 churches, in 10 years. But from 2010, God has done things among us that have enabled us to plant now about 175, 180 churches in the last 8 years. Now we have another 150 to go before 2020. But I kid you not, I believe that we will be able to do it in these next 2 or so years. By 2030, my prayer is that we as a chapel would have planted at least 10,000 churches. And you may ask, wow, how do you do that? And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about moving from addition to multiplication. Moving from addition to movement making. And 5 lessons I have learned in the last 8 or so years about church planting that is helping us to move from simple addition, one church at a time, every year, adding one to the numbers we are, to the place where we can begin to grow exponentially and multiply as opposed to add the numbers of churches that we're planting. So here's the first thing I learned. First thing I learned was, without a vision, a people perish. Set faith goals, even if you don't know how they will be achieved. And that's what the 300 did for us. Let me define what I consider to be a good faith goal for you. Number one, a good faith goal makes you sweat when you think about it. There is a sense of desperation. Lord, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. You need to come through because I have no idea. Please, please help me. A good faith goal will make you sweat and give you sleepless nights. And if the vision you presently have doesn't give you sleepless nights, then your goal is too small. When you wake up in the morning, you wake up in a sweat because you remember your vision again. That's the first thing a good faith vision does. Second thing a good faith vision does is it makes you go down on your knees because you know you can't do it unless God does a miracle, unless God shows up. And let me ask this question, guys. If you can do it without God needing to show up, then why do you need faith? Why do you need God? If your vision can be accomplished through careful strategic planning and through good budgeting, and you don't need to pray, you don't need to depend on the Spirit, you don't need to ask God to show up, then why do you need faith? A good faith vision, you're desperate for God to show up because only He can do it. Okay? Now, one of the verses in Scripture that for me has just really been encouraging me and challenging me in recent days is Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 8. It's that chapter of faith and the men of faith. And it says this in Hebrews 11 and verse 8. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. And then listen to this. He went without knowing where he was going. And I think it was about 4 months ago that I read that, and all of a sudden I saw something I had not ever seen, even though I've read this chapter many times before. He went without knowing where he was going. He didn't have a strategic plan. He didn't know exactly where he was going. It's like God told you, tells you go. And you tell him, so which direction? Go in that direction. Okay, I'm going in this side. How far do I go, God? I'll tell you when you get there. Just keep walking. And so I keep walking. Lord, how am I going to finance this? I'll take care of that. You just keep walking. He did not know where he was going. And I remember reading that verse and I thought to myself, we can do that? You mean I can go without knowing where I'm going? Yes, because God knows. And you know what? When God knows, you don't need to know. When God knows, He doesn't have to tell you the plan. If God told you what's going to happen a kilometer away and 2 kilometers away and tomorrow and the day after, why do you need faith? If you know the full plan from beginning to end, then God doesn't have to show up. The question is, will you go even though you don't know the full details? Even though you don't know the destination? If God tells you to go and plant a church in Namibia, Will you say, first give me the plan, I want to see the finances in the bank, I want to know how this is going to happen, and I need the visa, and I need X, Y, Z, and etc. And when all these things are done, God, then I will go. Why do you need faith? Can you go even though you don't know the plan in its details, and go because God has called you to obey? Is God sending you out even now and telling you to go and plant that church? But you're asking for the impossible because you're asking God to explain himself, to explain the plan, to lay it out, to sign every page of that plan, and to make a promise that is binding before you're willing to obey. Can you go even though you don't know what the plan is? A good faith goal forces you to think outside of the box. The number 300 forced us to start thinking big, to start dreaming big. You're not going to plant 300 churches by continuing to do what you're doing now, planting one church a year. Something needs to change. Think outside of the box. A bad faith goal is one where you can plan out and accomplish with some good human skills alone. If you can do it by human effort, then it's not a faith goal. So let me give you an example of this lack of planning and trying to go to places where you don't know where you're going, okay? In 2014, we made a decision that we're going to plant a church in London. Okay, now, you can imagine, London is a very expensive city to live in. You need visas to get in, and it's difficult to actually land on the ground and do this work. But we made a decision we're going to plant a church in London. We didn't know how you go about planting a church in London, but at least we could pray, and we began to pray. And you know what happened? A couple of things happened. It's almost as though God was waiting and saying, challenge me, challenge me. And so he said, Lord, we're going to plant a church in London. And he says, done. And we don't have an idea how it's going to happen. So you know one of the first things that happened? I get a call one day. I'm at home, out in the garden. I get a call and I see that the number is from the US. And I pick it up and I talk. And it's a pastor friend of mine in the US, leads a church there. And he tells me, Pastor Oscar, for the last 5 years, you've been on our case, giving us stress about planting churches. He had led and grown a church, a rhino, that he had led for the last almost 25 years. Huge rhino, they had never planted a church. And I was telling them, guys, your children's pastor has been here for the last 20 years. They are so experienced and so able. It is a shame. I remember speaking with the elders and telling them, when you elders get to heaven, God will judge you. Why? Because you kept these people, you hang on to them, you never freed them. Your children's pastor should be now leading a children's evangelistic mission ministry around the world with all the experience they've gathered after 20 years of being a pastor here. And so they said, well, we talked to the elders last night and we made a decision. We're going to plant 15 churches in the next 5 years. And then he went on and said, 5 of them will be in our city, 5 of them will be in our state, and 5 of them will be outside of America, somewhere else in the world. And then he went on and said, but we don't know how to do this, and you guys do, so you come and tell us what we're supposed to do, and we'll do everything you tell us to do. And then he went on and said, and because we don't know what to do, we'll follow you. But the thing we know how to do well is we know how to raise money well, so we will fund everything. And so he said, let's go to London, and they said, we'll fund it. God has answered the question. We didn't know how we're ever going to get to London. And God has answered how it's going to happen. So we went off to London. I told them, okay, we've been planting churches. And if I go back to the chapel and tell them we're planting one more church, they'll say, another church. But if you go to your church and tell them we're going to plant a church in London, it will wake people up. They will say, let's do it. We've never done this. So I said, you need to be the ones who will provide the pastor who will plant the church in London, and we'll walk alongside you and we'll help do this. And we'll teach you everything we know, we'll learn from you. And so he said, we don't have anybody. And I said to him, because by then, now as we're having this second conversation of who is going to be the leader, I was actually in the US with them. I said there were about 5, the mission leader, the assistant mission leader, and then the senior pastor, the executive pastor, and we're sitting in a boardroom. And I said, you have a staff here of about 250 people. Can I ask each of you to write down 3 people on your staff that you think could do this? And so they each wrote down, and we had a list of about 15 people. And I said, you don't lack people. You just have to have the courage to decide who's going to do it. So they said, okay, we'll do it. And they approached one of the people that they had written down, and the person said, I was in London last year, and I felt the Lord calling me to come to this city. And so this became the leader. So this leader goes off to London. Okay, we send him to go and do, prayer walk, excursionary trip, and etc. And he goes off to London. And in London, he meets an old friend, a vicar in the Anglican church. And they sit down for a coffee, and this vicar tells him, I've been leading this church. It's in decline. I'm tired. I want to give up. I want to rest. But I don't have anybody to leave the church to. So he tells his friend, God has just laid an impression on our church that I should come to London and plant a church here. So the vicar's eyes brighten up and he says, why can't we work together? Look, let's do this because I'm going to retire. Let you come and work with me for 2 years. And after 2 years, you can take over this church and you can lead it and I'll retire. And so they say, okay, let's consider that. They went off to see their bishop. The Diocese of North London had just ordained a new bishop position, the bishop for church planting in the diocese. And so they are sent to this man, and this man says, when I was ordained just, a few months ago, I was required to plant 100 churches in the next 5 years. I don't know how we're going to do this. So if you want to come and plant a church, come and work with us. And he made us make a promise. I will help you, but you have to plant for me 6 churches, not just 1. So he said, okay, we'll do it. No plan, no strategy, we'll do it. So he said, here's what we're going to do. We are going to get you visas under the Anglican Church. And you will come to Britain as missionaries because the Anglican Church is a state church and, the Queen is the head of the church and etc. And so we are allowed to issue visas. And so he said, I'll get you the visas you need. And he said, I will assign you to a church of this thingy. We need to ordain the lead pastor that you're sending to us so that you can go wherever you want to in England and plant the churches. And instead of you doing it for 2 years of ordination process, we'll fast track it. We've never done this, but we'll fast track it. 6 months we can ordain you. And we'll give you an apartment so that your people can stay there. You cannot believe it, guys. We're working with a church in London now, in Kensington. You know who stays in Kensington? Okay? It is Prince, what is his name? Pardon? Yeah, Prince William. Okay? The next heir of the throne stays in Kensington. If you Miros, if you Africans go there, you'll be arrested. Kwani, who are you? Huh? That's where we're planting a church. And so we've been in London for 2 years with visas in an apartment at the church, okay? And we have a team of 3 people that we sent. And I believe they're here on holiday. So let me call Brenda, let me call Clayton, let me call Josh. Please come up on stage. These are our heroes and are working with us to plant the church in London. Here they come. Welcome, Brenda. 1 lady and 2 guys. Come on up to stage. I want you to come up on stage. These three are our heroes in London. They are young, but they are doing a phenomenal work. Brenda here has been working with the children's ministry, and Clayton has been working with particularly the youth in the church that, the Anglican church that they're located in. They've gotten access into schools in that area to go and teach Bible and to meet with the kids. And then Josh here is a worship leader, and so he leads the music in the church. In the time that they've been there, the church has doubled in size since what it was before, okay? And I'll tell you a little more about them, but these are our heroes, and they're back on holiday, and we're celebrating them. Thank you, guys. So let me ask you, what is your faith goal? Have you named it? Have you called it out? Does it make you sweat when you think about what you're asking the Lord for? Does it give you sleepless nights? Have you publicized it? You see, once we came back and told the church we're going to plant 300 churches by the year 2020, it's out there. We can't, backtrack and reduce the size because, maybe we made a mistake. It's out there. And every time I stand here in front of the congregation and say, guys, 300 churches, I go back home and say, please, Lord, please help me because I don't know what to do. Have you called out your vision so that others know it and you cannot backtrack? Without a vision, a people perish. Here's the second lesson that I learned. Solve the problem of leadership. You know what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 9, verse 37 and 38? The harvest is plentiful. And let me speak this word out. The harvest in Saudi Arabia is plentiful. When God looks at Saudi Arabia, he sees all the potential children that he desires to call forward. When he looks at Canada, when he looks at the US, when he looks at, Ethiopia, when he looks at Sudan, when he looks at Somalia, God looks and he pronounces a harvest is plentiful. The problem is not the harvest. The problem is that the laborers are few. And until you solve the problem of laborers, you will never be able to bring in the harvest. If I gave you 100 acres of a ripe wheat field and told you, take as much as you want, you could go about it two ways. Number one is to get a sack and start, trying to harvest as much as you can every day for a week. And you'll fill 10 sacks of wheat. But if you're clever, you go and get 100 people. And you go into that wheat field and you harvest. The solution is laborers. And if you don't have laborers, I kid you not, you're going nowhere. That's what Pastor, Moses has been telling us. Those laborers are those disciples. If you're alone, you're not going to accomplish much. And if you want to plant churches and to plant as a movement, then solve the problem of laborers. The more you have, the more that is accomplished. So, this is the second principle we learned. Solve the problem of laborers. Without leaders, you're going nowhere even if you have the money. God is still in the business of calling men and women into ministry. Let me give you 14 places that I have learned to find laborers. I'll go through this very quickly. One is some of your best laborers are right under your nose. But because they're so close, you don't see them. You're coveting the laborers in another church. And you're impressed with the laborers in your neighboring church. But you don't see the ones that are right under your nose because they're so close, your eyes are over there, you're not looking down here. Some of your best laborers will be found in your fellowship. You just aren't seeing them. So look where you are. Number 2 is harvest in the church. When was the last time you made an altar call for people that God is calling into full-time ministry to come forward? People that God is calling to plant a church to come forward. People that God is calling to be bivocational pastors to come forward. Do you ever harvest in your own fellowship? Number 3, take people out on short-term missions that they can be broken by a world that is desperately in need of God, that they can see with their own eyes without the comfort of sitting in the chairs in the church, that they can touch and they can talk to and they can serve people who are desperate for God. And God uses that to change their hearts. Take them out on mission and then invite them into ministry. A 4th place that we've tried to find laborers is in theological college. I kid you not, when God called me, I went off for theological training. I was in college for 3 years doing a master's in divinity. I did not have an idea where I was going to go. Even on the night before I graduated, I had no clue what was to come next. And I told God, God, I don't know what to do tomorrow after I get my degree, but I will go and start a church. I will go and be a street preacher. I will do whatever I can to harvest. And it was then that a church came and told me, we want you to come and learn and grow. The night before I graduated. And so go and harvest there. Leaders in transition. Pastor Gowie, when I first sat down and talked with him, was disillusioned. He had left the organization he was with. He didn't know what the next thing is. And so I keep my ear close to the ground in this city. I want to know which pastor has left which church, and if there were no discipline or, issues, I want to sit down and talk with them, because leaders in transition already have the call. And I remind them, you may be disillusioned, but the call of God is irrevocable. And so come, let's work together. And he said yes. And we've been together now for, 15 years. How many years, Pastor Gowie? 17 years we've been together. So pastors or leaders in transition, people looking for a challenge. Because many times, as particularly youth pastors, if I may say so, they do the youth ministry, they do it. After some time, there's no challenge in it anymore because they've been at it a long time. And they're looking for something that will stretch them. And so I measure them. And I give them a challenge that will make them sweat. And many a times they will say yes because they're praying for more. Increase my tent pegs. People looking for a challenge. I have an open door policy. I want it advertised in the whole of Nairobi and in around Kenya. If God is calling you and you don't know where to go, come. Come. And let's work together. Because many churches do not have a door that people being called into ministry can walk through, and they can end up in ministry. When I went to the church I was attending before I came to to this work in the chapel, I told my pastor, God has called me to be a pastor, and I believe it's a lifelong call. And, I'm here in your church. And you know what he told me? He told me, you need to go and, because I was just graduated from college, you shouldn't go into ministry fresh out of college. You need to go and work for 5 years and, test the thing out there and then come back in 5 years and we'll talk. And I almost lost the call. 5 years. And yet God is calling me now. Fortunately, I met another pastor who said, if God has called you, he knows what he's doing. Say yes and go. And so I did. I had actually registered to do a master's. My undergraduate was a Bachelor of Science in Zoology. I'd actually registered to do a master's in zoology, knowing that God had called me to be a pastor. But I thought, okay, I need to kill time. So let me go and do a master's in zoology, and after that, maybe then I can come and ask again, am I ready now to go into ministry? And that pastor told me, you're wasting 2 years going to, as we say here in Kenya, to manga, just walking around doing nothing. If God has called you, he knows what he's doing, go. Amen. And so, an open door policy. College graduates. God is in the business of calling people who are pursuing medicine and law and whatever in university, but they know they're called, they just don't know that, they need to answer yes. And so go and harvest at your universities. People in business and in careers, firmly established, thriving, making money, doing amazing things, but God calls. And so you're businessmen and people in careers, and you might think this one will never go, but when God calls, they will leave that behind. Retirees who were retired from government at the age of 60, but they've got another 20, 25 years that they can serve with excellence. Conferences where you can call people into ministry. Overseas, we have a lot of Kenyans in diaspora all over the world, wasting their time, being waiters at McDonald's when they could be serving the Lord in Kenya. And so when I meet Kenyans overseas, I challenge them. And then we have something that we do here at the chapel, which is we get together as pastors on an occasional basis and we ask a question. The Bible says that God does nothing without revealing it to his prophets. Okay? So God, show us who you're calling. And we put down a list of people that we think God might be calling into ministry. These tend to be people who they're always around the church, they're always hanging around ministry, they're doing a fabulous job and they're asking for more responsibility. They're always asking the wrong questions, difficult questions, etc., etc. Many times they're wrestling with the call of God. And so we put down a list and we call it our hit list. And we pray through it. And then we approach them and tell them, I don't know, but as I've been praying, I just sense that God is calling you into ministry. And they say, And then we invite them to come. So we make a hit list. Another place where you can find workers is youth camps. Form 4 and 16-year-olds, because God calls people even that early. So you find them. Second thing you do is you develop them. You see, if I say yes, show me the pathway that will get me to the calling of God as he's called me. And again, many churches don't have a door, and when you open the door, there's just a big hole. You don't know what to do next. You need to create a pathway as a church. And we do have a pathway here. The first step of that pathway is what we call the internship. When you join the chapel as an intern, and we spend a year discipling you, teaching you the Bible, establishing you, etc., etc. The first step. And every year we take, maybe 30, maybe 40, interns, graduates of university from their different career paths. We invite them and they work with us. Now, I know we have some interns here, but I know a lot of them are serving in different places. Could I ask the interns to stand up? Those who are in their first year, can you just rise to your feet, or if you're on the periphery there, step in so that we can see you. The interns, if you could stand. There you go. And we have about 40 of them. Oh, here they are. Oh, no, this is a worship team. Oh, these are interns. Yeah, these are interns. Lopez, sorry, forgive me. Oh, these are interns. They're young. They're coming from different walks of life. I think the youngest one is actually 19 years. Okay? Annika from Germany is 19 years. And all these are interns. About 40 of them. And God is calling them into ministry. Okay, there you go. Thank you, guys. Let's give them a hand clap. These are amazing people. You are the future of the Church of Jesus Christ in Africa and in Germany and in the US. Where's Krista? She's here somewhere, okay? Thank you, guys. You can go off now, okay? That's the first year, okay? When they finish the first year, we have a second year that we call the pastoral trainees, and they're here somewhere, okay? I don't know how many pastoral trainees we have. After the second year, we have the ministry assistants, and then they become directors of ministry, then they become, assistant pastors, and then they become pastors. And so we have a 7-step pathway that leads somebody saying, I think God is calling me into ministry. And they can end up in ministry if indeed it is a call of God. You need to solve the leadership challenge. One other thing. With these young people, many of them are crying in their heart, give me a hill to die on. Give me dragons to slay. Don't make me a gopher, running around, doing photocopying and such. I want to be significant and do great things for God. Amen. And they're looking for a challenge because that is the reality of that age group. When I tell, 20-year-old, go off to London and plant a church, they say, when? If I tell Pastor Goyi, he'll ask me, is there insurance? Do I get a car? Is the house going to have 3 bedrooms? And I can't send him. But the young people say, when? And so the guys we sent to London who are up here, we ask them to make 3 covenants. Number 1 is a covenant of obedience. You've made a commitment to go to London and to plant that church. We're committing you to 7 years of that work. And you make a vow that you will not walk away from this call, that you will fulfill this call, and at the end of 7 years, we release you. And so these guys are committed for 7 years. Number 2 is a vow of poverty. We don't have money to pay you. We don't know how much money there will be. Don't go there expecting a car and living in a posh place and etc. If you all have to sleep on the floor on a mattress, if you have to, eat 1 meal a day, do whatever it takes and don't ever expect that you will make tons of money. A vow of poverty. And then a third was a vow of singlehood. You're single, do not go and find a wife, do not go and find a husband. For 7 years, we want you to do this work. You know what Paul says? A man who has a wife is distracted and his energy isn't going where it's supposed to go. We want you focused, and for 7 years. After 7 years, you can get a wife, you can get a husband. So those guys have made the commitment. And they're asking me, give me a challenge. When? Why have we lost this in the church? That sense of dying for the work of the Lord. The glory of being a martyr. We've lowered the bar so low that nobody's challenged and they go off to look for challenges elsewhere. The armies of the world call people to conscription and they challenge them to die for their nation. And they're all 18-year-olds. And so give them a challenge so that they can go. That is the second thing that I have learned. Third thing I have learned is don't send out church planters. Send out spiritual sons and daughters. You see, your spiritual son or your spiritual daughter has your DNA. And they will honor their father or their mother. But when you hire a church planter that you don't really know but he looks promising, the next guy who comes along and gives him a bigger salary will get him. Because he's not your spiritual son and daughter. I think we have forgotten the place of spiritual fatherhood. Maybe because we find the language, maybe we're afraid that it will be abused and used in the wrong way, but it is biblical. Paul writes to Timothy in 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, and he says, my true son in the faith, you are my spiritual son. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 7, he writes and says, like a mother caring for her little children. And so we're talking about spiritual motherhood here too. We loved you so much that we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well, because you have become so dear to us. For we know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, urging you to live lives worthy of God. This is biblical. 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 15, writing to the Corinthian church, even if you have 10,000 guardians in Christ, you do not have many fathers. I am your spiritual father. For in Christ Jesus, I became your father through the gospel. It is biblical. Are you raising up spiritual sons and spiritual daughters? These are the people you send out to be church planters. Now, I wish I could share with you what does a spiritual father or spiritual mother do with their children, but time won't allow us. Let me go on to the fourth thing I learned. Don't plant rhinos. Plant rabbits. Let me explain that in another analogy. I have a friend, a pastor in the US, and he's in Orange State, California. Big church of 15,000 or something like that. And they built a new, building, and they were decorating, landscaping, and etc. And they decided that they wanted an an olive tree grove on part of the compound, because of the place that olive trees have in the Bible stories. So one of the millionaires in the church offered to do this for them. They went to Israel, they took mature olive trees that were 100 years old, and they excavated them, about 25 of them, and they wrapped them up and they shipped them, flew them back to the US, and they came, dug a hole, and they planted those olive trees. Full-grown trees from Israel. When they told me this story, I told them I could have done that for 1,000th the cost that it cost that millionaire. It cost millions of shillings. I could have done it for 1,000 the cost that it cost that millionaire. And so, the person who was taking me around asked me, how could you do that? I said, I'd go and look for an orange tree seed. And I'd plant it here. And I'd water it. And in 100 years, you couldn't tell the difference between yours and mine. You see, I'm not trying to plant rhinos. They're expensive. They take a long time. You have to finance them. They need super leadership. They need a lot of, buildings and etc. I want to plant rabbits because they breed quickly and they accomplish the same work. I'm not trying to plant full-grown trees. I'm planting seeds. And the 300 churches, if you're 50 people or more, you won. We're done. I'll come back in 20 years and be amazed to see a rhino here because you grew and grew and planted and planted. So I'm not trying to plant big churches. I'm planting seeds, and we'll water them until they become big. So that's the fourth thing I learned. The final thing that has helped us as we're walking this path, and it is this that I think will move us from addition to multiplication to mega multiplication. It is this that will move us from 300 churches to the 10,000 I pray that over the next 12 years we can become. And it is this principle. When you plant pregnant. What do I mean by that? When a woman is pregnant, she can't pause her pregnancy, she can't delay it, she can't reverse it. Once you're pregnant, it's 9 months and the baby is going to come whether you like it or not. So when you plant a church, plant it pregnant, that it already carries a pregnancy, and whether the church likes it or not, it can't delay its pregnancy, it can't pause its pregnancy, it will give birth in its season. What does that mean? I think planting pregnant means this, that when you go out with a team, somebody on that team has been commissioned within a year of the church's planting to leave and go and plant another church. And you can't reverse that. And there's somebody else a little younger who's been commissioned. In the second year, you will go and plant. And in the third year, you will go and plant. And so you, because you've been trained some, in a year's time, 12 months, you go and plant. That's pregnancy. And when the time comes, they will go and plant. because the time has come to give birth. When you plant pregnant. To say to our churches, every year you must plant a church. So are you carrying a pregnancy now, a leader in development, so that you can go and plant? And for the bigger churches to say, you're like a rabbit. You remember what I told you yesterday? We're a rhino, but we want to breed rabbits. And so you don't just give birth to one. You give birth to multiple, twins and triplets and quadruplets and 10 and 20 churches. This church here is about 4,000 people strong. If you count the adults, the young adults, the youth, the teenagers, the children, 4,000 people strong. And so this church really needs to be planting 30 to 40 churches a year. And that's what we try and do. And the pregnancy are all those young people you saw up here. So when you plant pregnant. If every year you multiply, then the numbers grow exponentially. You may be one church in the second year, year 2, the third year, year 4, the fourth year, year 16, the next year, and you just keep going. And even if we take the numbers that Pastor Moses gave us, that there's 50% dropout, you will be amazed what happens in 10 years. Those 5 principles are helping us move from addition to multiplication, to plant many churches a year. The last church we planted, I think, was 3 weeks ago. And there are many more to come this year. God bless you. Thank you.